just in time.
Yeah, you did.
6 degrees
What?
in Kentucky.
Wow, 6?
And then there's 4 to 6 inches of snow coming Friday. In Kentucky.
Have you got to turn your mic on?
That's a good suggestion. They've got a really strange local weatherman, like what we have, Terry, here in Kitsap, the guy that does our... Tyler. They've got one down there, and everybody listens to him. Nobody listens to the news people. And he was talking about how cold it was going to be, and then the dog's warm nose was going to come up into Kentucky for a few days, a couple of days, which is now. And then if you wanted to leave, that would be the time to leave, and we did. And so I'm so happy to have. We really enjoyed our time down there, and we didn't do much because we lost power Sunday night from 2 in the afternoon, or 4 in the afternoon till 2 in the morning. It was cold in that house when there's no heat. But we got up this morning at 1 o'clock your time, and to catch our flight. So here I am. I won't say bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, but I'm here nevertheless. So let's begin with prayer. Our Father in heaven, thank you so very much for the good day you've given us. We're thankful for the safe arrival of each one here tonight. We are continuing to remember those of our family here that are in need of your attention and care, like Otto and Henry. Please bless them and watch over them. We pray you'll be with all those folks down in Southern California that are suffering with the wildfires. Many of them are our brethren. We pray that you'll keep them safe and be with the firefighters and keep them safe. And we just pray for a quick resolution of that difficulty. And we pray now for your presence with us here as we open your word together. Help us to understand the things that have been written to us. Help us to see the importance of knowing these things, understanding these things so that we can share them with others. And above all things, Father, we love you so much for sending your Son to die for us. And it's in his name that we pray. Amen. So we got down to the just got into question 4 last 2 weeks ago. And Paul has finally now getting into his boasting about his life, and he's hating to do it. But these false apostles have been boasting and bragging and putting Paul down and saying how much superior to him they are. Paul's going to call them in the first part of chapter 11 false apostles, that they are servants of Satan. And so as we look at, starting at the latter part of verse 21, Paul says, whatever anyone else dares to boast about, I am speaking as a fool, I also dare to boast about. And the word for dare is talmo. It means to be bold, to take courage. Talks about doing a task that must be done, needs to be done. Somebody's got to do it. And as distasteful as it is for Paul to kind of trumpet his own accomplishments and his works, it needs to be done because he has to match and surpass these false apostles that are among his brethren there in Corinth. And he's certainly going to do that here. So this section, and I gave you a brief kind of a rundown of it 2 weeks ago, that goes down through chapter 12 and verse 6. In verse 22, he's going to talk about his ancestry or heritage. 23 through 25, his service record. 26 through 27, he's going to talk about the dangers that he's encountered and the deprivations that he's endured. Verses 28 and 29, his pastoral concerns, the concerns that he has for the churches that he's established. Verses 31 through 33, what happened to him in Damascus, the narrow escape that he had there. And then outside of this lesson, when we get into lesson 19, he's going to talk about the first 6 verses in chapter 12 about his vision, his rapturous, ecstatic vision that he had. And we told you that this in Roman culture is called a res geste. We call it a curriculum vitae, where you just tell your history, your experience, your education, your qualities, and all of those kinds of things. And but he's going to add things to his curriculum vitae that also includes sufferings and failures or problems that he's had. And most of the Greeks, if they read that, would say, well, you shouldn't put that in there. It'd be like you putting in, well, I fired from the last 5 jobs I held. And well, why did you quit? Because I couldn't wait to get out of there. Those would not be things that you'd want to put on there. And Paul expects, especially these enemies of his, to be mortified by the things that he's saying. But at last it's going to dawn on them, and he doesn't really care if it dawns on them or not. He wants the Corinthians to see what a real apostle looks like. So now we get finally to this question: what boast does Paul make about his ancestry? And there are 3 descriptors here in the form of questions that he answers. The first 3, we'll look at the 4th later. And I asked you 2 weeks ago, what strikes you about these 3 questions in verse 22? As you're just reading through them, what kind of strikes you, Randy?
It kind of seems like they're all the same.
Yeah.
Are you a dog? Are you a canine?
Right. Right.
It's just different words.
Right. Are you a collie? Yeah. Are you a canine? Are you a dog? Are you a collie? And so they seem to be very redundant. And I'll tell you what I think that, first of all, that it does for us is it gives us an indication of what his enemies in Corinth are boasting about as compared to Paul. That they're Hebrews, they're Israelites, they're descendants of Abraham, as if Paul was not. And I'll show you why that becomes important. And even Paul mentions this in the book of Acts. But they are boasting about these things, disparaging Paul. And so Paul uses the things that they're claiming as a rank of superiority over him, and then he responds to it. Debbie, do you have your hand up? Or just your pen? Or
No. So I just read this as him being completely sarcastic. Like, duh, this is what I've done. And
yeah.
I mean, I don't know if that's right or not.
It's not anymore. He's not. I think he's left the sarcasm behind for a while anyway. From here on out, this is real stuff. This is why it's the word for boasting is to have a higher opinion of yourself than you ought, and this is real. So this isn't even an exaggeration. And I think and I can see where you would think that. But if you think of this as being the things that they're saying that they are compared to Paul, then it makes more sense. Okay, so what's the first one? What's the first question he asks? Are they Hebrews? And what does he answer? So am I. And Paul is. He's full-blooded Hebrew. His native tongue is Aramaic. Okay? Greek is a second language for him. And sometimes you can tell. I mean, if you read the epistles and you know Greek, which I do not, one of the reasons why I don't think Paul wrote Hebrews is because the Greek is so, I'm told this, I didn't read it this way, is so great. It's so exact and precise and well-formed. And that's not the Greek that Paul uses. It doesn't fit him. So the fact that he says, are they, and then answers, so am I, gives us, again, that importance. So though he comes from Tarsus, because he's Saul of Tarsus, he was raised and educated where? In Jerusalem. And his Hebrew genetic and behavioral influences, the fact that he was raised there and raised with the customs, are all positive. And so I don't know if these guys were raised in Jerusalem at the feet of Gamaliel or not, but he was. Okay. What's the next one?
Are they Israelites?
And then he answers,
So am I.
so am I. So now when he's talking about his being an Israelite, he's underscoring the cultural heritage that he has. He has been raised in a traditional Jewish home with all of its religious observances, and in fact, according to the strict discipline of what group? The Pharisees. Okay? Now, somebody turn to Acts 21 and verse 21, and this is a pretty key verse here, because what has Paul been doing since he left Jerusalem and Antioch? Where has he been spending his time? Let me put it this way. Among whom has he been spending his time? Among Gentiles. He's been hobnobbing with them. And these guys who are in some way, shape, or form Judaistic, they're going to be saying, how can you say that you're an Israelite and a Hebrew and spend all this time with Gentiles? That's just a contradiction. That can't be true. And so I think this is one of the areas where he's being attacked. So who has Acts 21, verse 21? Okay, John? Nothing? I love to say your name that way.
Oh, I lost it now. Okay, I got it back. And they have been told about you that you teach all the Jews who are among the Gentiles to forsake Moses, telling them not to circumcise their children or walk according to our customs.
Okay. See, that's what they're saying. How can you say Paul is a Hebrew and Paul's an Israelite? Everywhere he goes, all the Israelites in the dispersion out there among the Gentiles, he's telling them, you don't have to do this. You don't have to do that. And just disparaging his heritage and his culture. And so when Paul makes his final trip to Jerusalem before he's arrested, what do we find him doing in the temple? Pardon me? No, he'd already taken a vow. That's one thing that he'd already done. He took his vow in Cenchrea and shaved his head, which kind of indicates to me that it was a Nazirite vow. But what did he do in Jerusalem? Anybody remember? He paid for 4 guys for their vows. Was that a cultural thing? Yes. Yeah, do Christians have to take vows and shave their heads and do that? That isn't a part of the law of Christ. So why did he do that? To show that he has not turned his back on his heritage. He's still an Israelite. It's not a means of salvation. Doesn't give him a leg up in salvation with regards to God, but he's not just turned his back on his people. And of course, we're seeing that in Romans, aren't we? That he'd just soon go to hell himself if his brethren could be saved. So he can still live according to Jewish laws and customs. Now, the third one.
Seed of Abraham.
Are they
Abraham's descendants.
Abraham's descendants? And he says, so am I. Now here is where I think he just steps a little bit further aside from just the heritage part. Because if you're Abraham's descendant, from Paul's point of view, that makes him a Hebrew. And that would be redundant. Okay? Again, I said from Paul's point of view, obviously you could be Arab and be Abraham's descendant as well. But so he's showing in this, the purity of his line can be his lineage, his descendancy, his genealogy can go right back straight to Father Abraham. I am Abraham's descendant. But I believe that he has something higher in mind. Let's go over to Romans chapter 4 and verse 16. Who wants somebody to read that for me? Romans 4:16. Okay.
For this reason it is by faith, in order that it may be in accordance with grace, so that the promise will be guaranteed to all the descendants, not only to those who are of the law, but also to those who are of the faith of Abraham, who is the father of us all.
Okay, and I think that that's what Paul is focusing on here, or weighing more heavily here, is this higher relationship that he has with Abraham in a spiritual sense. And so this now becomes just an added level of superiority over his rivals, as he sees the spiritual connection to Abraham as well as the physical. I have the physical. I am a Hebrew. I am an Israelite. But I also have the spiritual connection to Abraham. And it is with connection to that, and back again in chapter 11, that's the Jesus I preach to you, that these guys are preaching a different Jesus. That's the gospel that I preach to you, that they're preaching another gospel. That's the spirit that I preach to you, and they're preaching another spirit. And all of which are different. And so back in chapter 21 again, or verse 21, he in the very beginning he says, whatever anyone else dares to boast about. Literally that says, in what thing someone chooses to boast about. So here's he's kind of picturing his enemies there, and he challenges them, go ahead, just pick one. Pick any single item that I've listed here. Hebrew, Israelite, descendant of Abraham. You choose one, and I'll take up the gauntlet and we'll have it out. That I'm superior to you in all of these ways. And I will uphold my boast on any single point you want to bring up. And so, in whatever thing, and we'll see a little bit more about that in just a minute. Which brings us to the last comparison, which begins there in verse 23. And what is that?
Are they servants of Christ?
Are they servants of Christ? Now, every time before, are they Hebrews? Are they Israelites? Are they descendants of Abraham? What did he say? What's he say here? I am more. I am more. Now, I just wanted to put that little thought in your mind. Let's look at the thing that he said just before he said that, or right after before he said I am more. He said, mine's in a parenthetical statement, I am out of my mind to talk like this. And this is kind of an interjection and aside that he says, how hard, let me ask you this, how hard would it be for Paul to ask the Corinthians there about these rivals, are they servants of Christ? What did he just call them just a few verses back? False apostles and ministers of Satan. I mean, I bet his fingers were cramping up on the pen when he wrote, are they servants of Christ? It's just astounding. It's just been so hard, almost a profanity for him to ask that question. But again, he's reminded, and that's what he's saying here, he's reminded of the fact, I have to do this. I have to boast about this. I have to go through this and compare myself to them and show how superior I am to them. And the word for I am, in my translation, I'm out of my mind. What do some of your others have? I speak as a fool.
I speak as if insane.
I speak as if insane. I'm beside myself. I knew somebody would be there. It literally means to be insane. I mean, it means to be insane. It literally means beside myself. Is that a New American Standard Bible?
That's the Young's Literal Translation.
Okay, same thing. I mean, no, it's not the same thing, but it is. You gave me a literal translation. And the modern expression would be, I'm talking crazy. So he's designating himself as a servant of Christ, which if I were to ask Paul, okay, Paul, which one of these 4 things that you've listed here, a Hebrew, an Israelite, a descendant of Abraham, a servant of Christ, which one's the most important to you? Servant of Christ. That's got to be the dominant, the most important qualification, because he has not only in his mind his conversion to Christ and being a Christian, but he also has his call to be an apostle and his commission that he received to do that. And they're calling themselves servants of Christ. They're calling themselves apostles. Okay? And Paul doesn't consider them to be either one. So when he says this, are they servants of Christ? I am more. I don't know if you understand how newspapers work. Got a story. What's the thing you're going to read first? The headline. What comes next? The opening paragraph. The opening paragraph is going to tell you what? What the rest of the article is about. And then the rest of the article is going to contain details. Okay, Ross, go ahead.
I was just going to, real quick, it's interesting, because of the mystery of the gospel, we can claim like 3 of these 4. It's just kind of cool, because like Hebrews feels more like true ethnicity type of an
Right.
idea. But like we are spiritual Israel, we are descendants of Abraham, and we are servants of Christ. So it's cool, like we even get
Right.
to be welcomed into 3
Right.
of the 4.
And basically Paul's saying these guys get 0. Maybe Hebrew. They may be actual descendants of Abraham. I mean, in the sense of their genealogy. So this, are they servants of Christ, becomes the headline for what's going to follow down through chapter 12, verse 6. And what you're going to see in the rest of verse 23 is that first paragraph. Here's what I'm going to be talking about in the article. And my labors and all of the things. He's going to list them off there. And then he's going to delineate. He's going to become more specific. He's going to give you numbers and details of what he's done. Yes?
I'm trying to get my head around why he's saying he's beside himself when this is all stuff that he did. And I kind of get it because he's beside himself and he's actually having to defend it.
That's exactly why.
Like, why should I look at all of
Right.
what I've done
Right.
and had to experience and endure
Right?
all of this suffering, and you're questioning that I'm a servant of Christ.
Yeah.
Is that kind of
My authenticity, my validation as an apostle. And how much of this do you suppose is brand new news to the Corinthians that he's going to give in this section? Maybe chapter 12. Maybe that section, verses 1 through 6. Maybe that's new to them. But the rest is not. If Paul didn't tell them, his associates told them. They know all of this about him. He started off this letter by saying how close he came to death. It was for sure they were going to die. There was no hope for them. They were dead, as good as dead. And then the Lord came in and rescued them. So, unlike the other 3, again, Paul said, I am more. So equality, I am too, I am too, I am too. Equality on the idea of being a servant of Christ is not enough. Paul has to leave them in the dust on this one. And because they're not just lesser servants and lesser apostles, they're not servants or apostles at all. And they shouldn't be able to even stand on the same platform as him. And so he's saying he is beyond all such who have anything that would claim to be anything like what he is. And again, back to Randy's point, he's hating that he's having to do this. It's crazy that I'm having to do this. Have you ever talked to somebody, or maybe your kids, because this is almost what it's like, and say, I shouldn't have to be telling you this again? That's the idea here. Jonathan?
Well, and even having gone through all of those things, so often we see Paul looking at those working alongside him as equals.
Right. Right.
In the way that he talks about them, and the way he prays
Right.
them, builds them up, and encourages
Right.
them.
Well, and Titus has been here. Titus was here before, and now he's coming back. I'm sure he's he's fought the good fight for Paul and said, don't you know who he is and what he's done? And again, they say he's strong in his letters, he's weak in person. Well, now he's going to be strong everywhere. Each of his claims here is preceded by in. If I just read the rest of this, the NIV, do you still have your literal? Listen to what it says in the literal, because the NIV kind of tries to smooth things out, because we got 4 prepositional phrases, in this, I, and it tries to smooth that. It's kind of bumpy and rough, but listen to it in the literal.
Where do you want me to start?
I just want you to start, I am more.
Okay, I was down below. Okay, here we are. I more, and labors more abundantly.
Just a second. Listen for the word in. Go ahead.
In labors more abundantly, in stripes above measure, in prisons more frequently, in deaths many times.
See? In. Remember back, I mentioned a minute ago, back in whatever anyone else dares to boast about. In whatever anyone wants to boast about. In whatever. In labors, in this, in suffering, in deaths. Pick one, friends. That's what he's basically saying. And then he's going to go through these back again and just illustrate them and expand on those things as he's going through this. Are they this? I am more. That's the last time you're going to hear him say I. I am more. It's not in those prepositional phrases. It's understood, but it's not in the Greek. And so, again, thinking about his enemies there, their res geste contained all kinds of accomplishments, grandiose lists of conversions and recommendations and letters that they had. I guess they contained no suffering, no pain, no danger, no persecution. None of that for the sake of Jesus and his word, which Paul's about to expand upon. Okay, any comments on question 4? You didn't have any idea there was that much in question 4 to do. Question 5. This is the boast, and I'll just go ahead and start reading. Well, somebody else read it, because my voice is a little scratchy. So, starting with 23b. Let's see. Well, just read from I have worked much harder. So after the I am more, read from that verse, that part of verse 23, down through verse 29. Who's got it? Somebody hasn't read yet. Okay, Tim?
I am a better one, with far greater labors, far more imprisonments, with countless beatings, and often near death. 5 times I received at the hands of the Jews the 40 lashes less one. 3 times I was beaten with rods. Once I was stoned. 3 times I was shipwrecked. A night and a day I was adrift at sea. On I am not indignant.
Okay, thank you. So again, I don't know if you noticed that in verse 26. In, all the way through there. Pick one. Which area do you want to boast about? In which area do you want to boast? Now, having read that and having had it read, what strikes you about this list of sufferings here of Paul's life? I should have asked you this 2 weeks ago so you could have had some time to think about it. Is there anything that strikes you about that?
It's intense.
Pardon me?
It's intense.
Okay, yeah, it's intense. Yeah. Randy?
It seems, he seems to have suffered for Christ everywhere that he has gone.
Okay.
And having just said that, I'm thinking about when he wrote from prison to the Philippians about, I have learned to be content in whatever state I'm
Right.
in. And-
Yeah.
And,
And here's a few states we wouldn't want to visit.
right.
Right. Yeah. Josh?
I think also every single thing that's listed that's happened to him were either attempted executions or things that should have killed him.
Okay. Okay.
But he was kept alive miraculously.
Okay.
Right.
Okay. So what struck me, or what strikes me about it, is there's a ton of stuff here that's not in Acts.
The part about the rivers, for example.
Well, yeah. I mean, I know there were times when he's traveling overland. Of course, he had to cross rivers, but yeah, Luke doesn't give us that. How many times do you know that he was shipwrecked? One time. Did you know that one time happened after he wrote 2 Corinthians? That one doesn't count in this grouping of shipwrecks. Because he writes 2 Corinthians, goes to Corinth, then heads to Jerusalem, is there for 2 to 3 years, comes back to be taken to Rome in prison, and that's when he's shipwrecked in Acts 28. That's years after he wrote this. Was he stoned in Acts? Yeah, I remember when he was stoned. You remember when he was stoned in Acts? I don't know how many times the Jews beat him. I know that he was beaten. I know that he, was like in Acts 16, the Romans took him aside, and beat him there in the marketplace and threw him in jail. But I just was amazed at that. And so I just wanted to kind of give you an alert here that, as with any historic document, it doesn't cover, it's not a minute by minute, day by day, week by week record of Paul's, his life. And it's not intended to be. Paul was converted well, I have down here 34 AD. That's probably pretty close. We always go to 33 AD, and that's if you have Jesus born in 0, and he's probably born in 4 to 6 BC. So he probably died in 29. And so that would be 5 years after that. And in that year, he preached in Damascus. We know from Galatians that after he left Damascus, where did he go? For parts of 3 years. Arabia, very good. He returns to Damascus, that's in Acts 9, and then goes to Jerusalem, and Barnabas stands up for him, and they're wanting to kill him in Jerusalem, and so where did he flee? Where did he go? He went back to Tarsus. And the next time we see him is 10 years later, when Barnabas goes to Tarsus and brings him back to Antioch. So there's a lot of years in Paul's life from the time that he was converted that we don't have in the book of Acts. Did you think he went to a spa in Tarsus for 10 years and just kind of getting all beefed up and pumped and ready for really hard work? No, I think some of this stuff happened there. I think he's working there too. So, and listen, some of it may have occurred during his ministry in the book of Acts, and Luke just didn't record it. Okay? So, everything that Paul lists here, and you talked about intensity, there's a vitality here, there's a life here, there's power here, and there's no false notes. There's nothing that's embellished. It's all true. I can't imagine how many minor or lesser sufferings that he doesn't list here that he endured. And listen, when he finished the ancestral list, he left his opponents way behind. Now they're just sitting there. They have nothing. They will have nothing to say. Jonathan and then Tim.
Yeah, I guess just as you're reading through this list, and I'm just thinking about Paul and all he went through, and how if he wasn't as convicted as he was about what he was doing,
Right.
it would be so easy to think, life sure was a lot easier back
Mm.
before.
Yeah.
And that would be an awfully strong temptation, I mean, to face.
Sure.
To think, this is the list of everything I've endured
Right.
that I didn't have to endure and that I didn't
Right.
have to continue to endure.
There was a whole book written for that, for people like that. What was it? You remember?
Well, I'm thinking of Job.
No, in the New Testament.
Oh, in the New Testament.
Hebrews.
Yes.
Because people were saying, wow, it's sure a lot easier when I was a Jew and I didn't have to put up with all this persecution and suffering. Tim?
Well, I was just thinking about at the beginning of the book where he, in the introduction, says that it's him and Timothy, and then throughout all that, he mentions we this and we that, and then here, there's an absence of that. So that
Oh, yeah.
that was probably the hardest part.
Yeah.
because He would have rather told about what,
What Silas went through.
Timothy or
Yeah.
Silas or
Yeah.
Luke had to go through.
That's a really good point. More. This is what I have done. This is getting back to your, I'm talking crazy.
I think what's also alarming about this set of credentials that he lists is that if anyone was to say one of these happened to them once, we would still think they were a hero.
Right.
Like enduring
Yeah.
that and coming back. And we wouldn't fault them if they
Right.
didn't go do that thing
Right.
anymore. And he continued to serve
Right.
serve Christ in this way, and I think that's what he's trying to do.
Right.
I served him in these ways.
Yeah. I just thought of something getting back to Randy's thing here. It's like Paul sitting here, and he's there, and he's saying all this stuff, and he's saying, I can't believe I'm saying that. He's beside himself, watching himself make this speech about himself, and saying, I can't believe I'm doing that. It's just crazy. Yes.
You talked about this when we were in chapter 4, but it's just amazing how he describes this.
Yeah, that chapter 4 is a really,
4 verse 17.
yes.
Our light affliction,
Yeah.
which is but for a moment.
Right. Well, and he has that little short list of suffering there, that was kind of just like a wait till I get to the big article at the end. And that was amazing. Yeah. And our light affliction. Yeah. And my second thing that I was going to say, and Tim beat me to it, is he leaves out his assistants. It's just him. And you suppose they suffered the same things? Was Silas thrown in prison? Was Silas beaten? Yeah, all of these guys, they're all going through, in Athens when there's in Ephesus, when there's the riot, two disciples, two fellow brothers were taken in, and they're all doing that. And, he had to post bond in Thessalonica so that one of them did, so that Paul wouldn't preach there anymore. Gaius and Aristarchus was there in Ephesus. And again, I just want to reiterate, the Corinthians were familiar with this stuff. This isn't new to them. It's just all put together in one spot. I mean, it's like a concentrated list of things. And who could read this and after reading this say, yeah, I was right, he's weak. There's not a way in the world that they could do that. In fact, this is the opposite of the lordly tyrants that are among the Corinthians now, demanding food and board or room and board and being supported and taken care of. This is the opposite of that. Okay? So, let's see. I'm going to skip on down here. Again, I'll just take you back to verse 21b and whatever. And so he has 4 in phrases here in this first little section, and then they're going to be fleshed out. So when he says there, I've worked harder, I've been in prison more, I've been beaten more, I've been in deaths more. So in labors more abundantly, that's 2 Greek words, kopos, which means toilsome labor, wearisome fatigue, and persisos, P-E-R-I-S-S-O-S, means abundantly, exceedingly, greatly. And listen, that could partially be tent making, that he was having to do that work. Any of you ever watched Antiques Roadshow? No, that's not what I want. Sorry, but I'm glad that you watched that. The repair shop. Have you ever seen the repair shop, the British repair shop? There's a woman on there that does leather, and she takes these needles with her fingers and shoves them through the leather, and then pulls them and tightens. It's all done by hand, not by machine. You know how hard that would be? How calloused your fingers would be? Well, think about working with canvas all the time and sewing it. And you couldn't pop out your little Singer sewing machine or your Pfaff or whatever you had there to run it through. That's all done by hand. But I think because he says labors more abundantly, I think he's also referring to his apostolic ministry, the work that he does there. And again, wanting them to compare that to these false apostles. What do they labor in? They labor in their bed and breakfast that they're having at your house. And again, remember, if you go back to Romans chapter 16, Romans 16 verse 18, I think. Let me get over there. He said, "For such people are not serving our Lord Jesus Christ, but their own appetites. By smooth talk and flattery, they deceive the minds of naive people." Do you know where Paul was when he wrote Romans? In Corinth. In Corinth. They were there then, or at least some of them kind of like that. They're not serving Christ, they're not serving him a bit. They're serving their own belly. So his labors were more abundant, and we'll see that. These are just, again, this is just what I'm going to be talking about. In imprisonments. Paul had multiple imprisonment that goes way beyond the record in Acts. At the time that this was written, Paul had one major imprisonment, and that was Acts 16. The early church, an early church document by Clement, it's part of the works of the fathers is what they call it. 1 Clement chapter 5 and verse 16 numbers Paul's imprisonments at 7. As he gives a list of those. How many times do you suppose the rivals in Corinth were in prison? Just take a wild guess. None. I think you're probably right. Paul uses the same Greek word here, persisos, abundantly, exceedingly. In beatings, the Greek word is plege, P-L-E-G-E. What does plege sound to you like? Plague. Our English word comes from that. In fact, you'll hear that this nation was struck with a plague, the striking of that. Beatings, floggings, wounds, stripes, afflictions, which was a fairly common form of punishment. Even the armies of the 18th and 19th century, the British flogged their soldiers when they disobeyed. The Navy flogged people. And how many beatings did he have? Multiple. Not just a single time, but multiple times. And again, he's going to be more specific here in just a few minutes. And, I just have to ask, how many beatings for the sake of Christ did these false apostles endure? Did they endure any? Have they endured a single stroke? Even just one lash? What?
They're enduring one now.
Yes. A tongue lashing. Yeah. And Paul says here the word above measure is the Greek word. The NIV has more severely. The New American Standard Bible has without number. After a while, you lose count of how many times. Now, oh man, we're out of time. I want you to think about this one, though. This is a good place for me to stop. I always like to give you a nugget. This would be 1:15, right? This is 8. So can you see how you could endure labors, have many labors, or many beatings, or many imprisonments or floggings? This one literally says, in deaths. Death, plural. How do you do that? Think about that, okay? And we'll talk about that next week.